Thank you for tuning in. Today I'm going to be speaking with Lukas Gauthier from the University of Nevada. Lukas and I spent a bunch of time together at UCLA, and he has worked his way up in the football world to a higher position now, and he's going to get into that a little bit more. Today we're going to go into his perspective on recruiting and how you can best make a choice to find a school that's a good fit for you and a good fit for them. A lot of times people make mistakes when it comes to this area, so we want to try to avoid any pitfalls and be proactive as possible about it. So Lukas, can you tell us a little bit about your background?
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I always like to, share my perspective with people. I grew up in the Los Angeles area. I was a high school athlete, a subpar college athlete, and I ended up going to UCLA, and I joined the football program there. Worked my way up from an equipment manager all the way to, helping in the recruiting office, and have kind of seen all phases of football and the way it works. And, obviously at a high level institution, and now I'm 2 years removed from my service at UCLA, and I'm at the University of Nevada, and I'm the director of player personnel. So I direct all the recruiting and manage the roster.
That's awesome. I think just being able to be part of it and seeing your progress over the past 10 years, I guess, is kind of insane. You go from literally being a ball boy and snapping the ball, and those are some of the hardest jobs. You think about like life experience and think about people who learn how to grind. Like, you got to have a different mindset for that, because I saw you guys doing it, and it's insane.
Yeah, you have to learn to love doing the thankless things, you know. You got to learn to do things that aren't going to be appreciated, and you're not doing them because you want to be appreciated. You're doing them because you have a goal and a mission and an objective in mind. If you keep that in your forethought, like, you're going to be successful regardless of what it is. You just got to do whatever it is to help you accomplish your mission. Like, nobody's ever going to say, "Hey, thanks for snapping that ball." But when you snap the ball wrong, you're going to get yelled at. So it's kind of that give and take, and just knowing why you're doing what you're doing.
Absolutely. And I think that's a great lesson for anybody going into college in general. It doesn't have to be football related, but
Right.
You're going to have to go through a grind no matter what profession you're in. Nothing's ever going to be handed to you. You're going to have to do the little things right and show that you're really disciplined early on to be able to have a greater responsibility. So that's a really valuable lesson. So one of the things I wanted to touch on, just what is the recruiting process like for you on the college's end? What are you looking for, intangible wise, skill wise, from a high school athlete?
Yeah. The initial thing that's going to attract a person to the University of Nevada, for example, is their athleticism, what they can provide you from a talent standpoint, right? So that's the first thing we look for, period. We want really highly athletic, productive people that can come to Nevada and really, play and make us win, because we get paid to win games. That's the bottom line. But, you only play, 12 to 16 games a year, and those are 3 to 4 hour games, so like, your production on the field matters, but 99.9% of the time you're going to be dealing with these athletes, and you have to worry about getting them to class, and worry about, them making the right decisions every day and representing your university and things of that nature. So once we initially identify the talent, it's digging and discovering on who they are as a person, because the truth is, like, most coaches, they don't want a headache. They don't want someone they're going to have to chase around and walk to class and do those things. So it's my job to really find out, what's this kid's character like? What's his background like? What kind of family is he from? Is he somebody that I'm going to have to walk to class? And depending on the scenario, you're going to have maybe someone's just so supremely talented that people are willing to give up some of those things. But for me, I'd rather take an above average athlete that does all the right things. He's a good student. I don't have to worry about off the field, doesn't have a bad history with women, things of that nature. Those are things that we're going to try and find and dig, and we're going to utilize every resource we have to get as much of a profile on a person as possible once we identify their talent to play football.
So when you say you look at some of these intangibles and you want to find out if they're a good person, what ways do you dig a little bit deeper? Like, are you asking questions to their teachers at the high school? Are you asking people aside from the football staff?
Yeah. So initially you're going to call their coach, you'll talk to their high school coach. Everybody is going to do things differently. Every college staff runs differently, but I think for the most part, you're going to try to get as many perspectives as possible because, maybe a coach has a bad relationship with you for whatever reason. So you're not just going to rely on one opinion unless it's like my brother's the coach and I really trust my brother's opinion. In that sense. So we'll talk to the parents, we'll talk to the kid, we'll talk to the coach, we'll talk to a teacher. You try to get as many different references as possible so that you can create a full profile. And really, like, you're looking for good in a person, so you're not going to try and like only gain one perspective and then leave it at that. I think that's bad effort on your end and on their end. How can you classify a person with one perspective? So that's a lot of what we're doing. And honestly, like, sometimes you'll hear good things about a kid and then you'll get on the phone with a kid and it just, like, he's not paying attention, or there's a lot of things that happen throughout the process. I think kids need to realize, like, when they're on the phone with a coach, or for example, Zoom has been such a big thing lately. Like, you'll get kids that are on Zoom calls and they're like, their shirts are off and they're just not presenting themselves in the best light. And you only have so many impressions to impress a person, right? You only have so many opportunities to impress a person, rather. So, you got to utilize those and really present yourself in the best manner. That's not to say you have to be super uptight, and you can show your personality, but, the truth is, in the college recruiting process, you're not going to be able to talk to a kid every single day. Typically, you're not going to be able to go meet them and their family all the time. You might have 3 or 4 interactions with their family in person before they sign on the dotted line. So, those are really important interactions, and you just have to rely on the people close to the kid that may not be, that can give you perspective on them.
Really good point. I know from my experience in strength and conditioning, when we had some of those recruiting visits, there were a lot of kids who just couldn't focus for even the time that they were talking to the strength and conditioning staff. And the amount of questions that we got about what was our perception of the individual who came in, his family and his parents, was pretty important. And you can get some really, really good information just from watching them as you're doing your presentation. Is strength and conditioning going to be important to them? Is nutrition and fueling going to be an important part that they value, or is it not? And then maybe it's not going to be a great fit for the program.
Right. Yeah. So you just have to see where you align with the kid and make sure that it's a good decision mutually.
So a lot of kids aren't going to be this high level recruit that is going to be sought out by a Nevada or a Pac-12 school. What are some things that young athletes, freshmen, sophomores in high school can do to kind of get some notoriety if they aren't at that elite level? Because I've seen so many times where walk-ons end up, 3 or 4 years down the road being major contributors to a program. And these are maybe later developers, but, everything is there: grades, personality, intangibles, the kind of kid that you want on a team. So can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, the first thing, it's cliche, but control the controllables, right? Like, start your freshman year off right. Make sure your grades are good. Make sure you're treating people with respect. Make sure you're working hard in the weight room. You do all of those things, the rest is going to come. Part of that too is, like, if you want to be recruited, you're going to have to do the things on your end to get recruited. So, for example, like, there are seniors right now that don't have highlight tapes. Like, you should be creating a mid-season, a 3-game highlight tape, a mid-season highlight tape, a full season highlight tape for every single year. And that way, it's giving college recruiters an opportunity to keep up with you throughout a period of time. So that's one thing I would do from the beginning of freshman year is, I'm going to prepare like a student athlete off the field, and I'm going to make sure that the coaches have an opportunity to see my film as it goes and as it progresses. I'm going to have my transcripts readily available. The second somebody asks me for them, boom, here you go, coach. I'm going to know you're going to try and familiarize yourself with the process, right? So the things that coaches are going to initially ask you, hey, do you have a highlight tape? Yeah, here it is, coach. Here you go. Hey, what's your transcript look like? Oh, here you go. My NCAA core GPA is this. Those are all things that are going to, one, show somebody that you're serious and on top of it. And like, there are times when I ask a kid, hey, can I see your transcript? And I don't get it back for 3 months. Initially in my mind, I'm thinking, oh, this kid's probably not a great student, or he's just not prepared. So those are things that are really simple that you can do. It's out of your control whether or not a college coach reaches out to you. You can't control that, but what's in your control is preparing yourself for if they do. So I think that those simple things, also, not every high school coach knows the recruiting process. So maybe going to the high school coach and saying, hey, I want to be a college athlete. That is my goal. And if you let them know that, then they can start to kind of work for you. They'll hopefully give you an honest gauge of, you're a D3 kid, you're a D2 kid, you're a D1 kid. You also have to be real with yourself. I was a 5'10" semi-athletic dude, right? I was too slow to play safety and not big enough to play linebacker. I had to be honest with myself, and I was probably a D3 kid. There's nothing wrong with that, but I kind of looked myself in the mirror and I said, all right, that's what I am. And so I reached out to a bunch of D3 coaches, and that's kind of how I got opportunities to play. And I ended up going to a junior college. But regardless, like that's you got to look yourself in the mirror, be honest with yourself. Another good way is to attend camps. And just camps are a good opportunity. Typically they're relatively cheap, and they're a good opportunity for you to just get coached by college coaches and then gauge yourself against other athletes that you might not see, on a daily basis, like your teammates, for example. So those are all ways I think students can put themselves ahead of the 8 ball.
A lot of times the students aren't nearly as interested as the parents, especially when it comes to that lower level recruiting threshold. What are some tips for the parents that you might want to give? Because sometimes they're a little bit too overzealous to get in touch with the recruiting coordinator, and it's a little bit too much, especially if the level of talent isn't something that's being recruited very heavily. Right. So what can you do to kind of not be annoying? Because I know a lot of times we had instances where it was just ridiculous what was going on in terms of the parents. So what can you do on a parent's end?
Yeah, I think parents need to realize that their actions are going to affect their kids' recruitment. If a staff doesn't want to deal with the parents, they're not going to recruit. Sometimes the kid can pay the consequence for that. So I think the parents just kind of understanding, respecting people's time, not being too pushy. There's a fine line between being persistent and being annoying. And just trying to balance that as much as possible, and realizing that, like, at the end of the day, it's up to the kid. Like, it's the kid's dream. Now, I understand as a parent, I'm not a parent myself, but I know my parents, for example, they wanted the best for me, and they're going to try and do things for me. And you're a young kid, you probably don't realize all the things that you need to do to achieve your goals. So that's where the parent or whoever's influencing you comes in. And so, like, it's not bad to want to help your kid. It's just, you need to realize that you can bring detriment onto his or her recruitment, because of your actions. So understanding that as much of an evaluation of the tape, it's an evaluation of him and the people around him. If you're dealing with a helicopter parent, and the kid is just as good or as another person on the board, but the other person on the board's parents are really cool and easy, and you're probably not gonna have any headaches, I'm probably gonna lean towards taking that person instead. So you got to understand that it's a competition in terms of the board, and people are constantly kind of assessing, all right, this kid's here because of these reasons, and it might be external outside of their ability to play football.
Right. So a lot of other variables to consider, and you want to obviously make sure that you're optimizing the situation for whatever your particular case is, who you're getting recruited by, and making sure that you can get pushed up that board. There's nothing preventing you other than the quality of your football talent from really being highly recruited. So sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's a huge point that you just said. Like, let your football do the talking, and all of the other stuff that you can control. Like, you can work out and play hard and be smart and learn the game, right? That's all stuff you can control. You can really only control so much of what your true athletic ability is. So control everything else that you can control, and then everything else will lie in its place.
Absolutely. Are there any specific recommendations when it comes to camps? Like, should you be trying to go nationwide for camp exposure, or is it best to stay regional and just try to really facilitate that talent as something that's more word of mouth than anything else?
Yeah, I think it depends who you are. A lot of that's going to be case by case. Maybe you're a kid that wants to go to a school on the East Coast. So it might be a good idea for you to, see, all right, there's 12 colleges that I might be interested on the East Coast, and I'm a West Coast kid. I'm going to go to those camps and just see what happens. The truth is that it's if you're not an elite athlete, or, it's less likely that a school is going to recruit nationally. That doesn't mean that won't happen. But for example, a lot of the Mountain West teams, if you look at their roster is predominantly West Coast kids. And that's just because typically people want to go to colleges within their region and so on and so forth. So I think if I'm speaking in generalities, yeah, it's probably best to just kind of identify a location that you may want to go to school. Use camps as a way for you to visit schools like anyone would be if they weren't an athlete, right? Like, people always go visit schools. You think of it kind of the same way. All right, I'm going to go to these camps, but I'm also going to tour the campus and I'm going to make something out of it. I'm going to get a chance to see these coaches, see the school, be coached by them, compete, and then I'm going to go to a camp so what I always advise people is, hey, like, camp dates usually come out sometime after the season. See if you can organize when your camp dates are for whatever schools you want to go to, and kind of make a trip out of it. It's never too early to go to a camp. They're typically open freshman through senior year, so you can visit a few schools this summer and kind of hopefully gain a good decision after that.
Yeah, 100%. I think really a big takeaway from this conversation so far is just there is so much equal talent across the board in the country. Like, there's not a lot of athletes that stand out so much that you won't be able to find somebody comparable at a similar position who's not a headache, or who has good grades, or whose parents don't get involved more than they should. It's just so easy to find somebody else. Like, as good as you think you are as a high school athlete, there are going to be kids across the country who are just as good. And like you said, going back to the other intangibles, like, just don't make it an issue. Don't make it an issue. And that's.
And I think the normal person would be shocked at how excessive those problems are. And that's why coaches don't want to deal with them, because, I think a lot of younger coaches might take on those risks because, they're younger and they think they can change the person. And, you get some more coaches that are older and probably a little more cynical, and they're like, I'm not dealing with that. I dealt with that, and it was a terrible experience. And at the end of the day, for me and for our staff, this is how we provide for our families. So, we aren't going to put that at risk. And the truth is that, like, a recruit is not more important than my son or my daughter or my wife that I'm trying to provide for. Like, you want to bring somebody in that is going to add to your family and allow you to keep providing. So if you can eliminate all of those issues, and the coaches can simply focus on the fact that, hey, he's either good enough to take or he's not, then that's the best thing you can do for yourself.
Really cool. So one of the variables that always comes into play, is probably the most important one, other than character and football skill, academics. So being at UCLA and seeing the level of academics, that's pretty much going to be an uncommon place where you really have to have a knack for education, really want to be involved in that type of program where you're going to have to put in the work. Not every program is like that, and it's at other schools there might not be as much of an emphasis, where you can get away with a little bit more, and you won't be as stressed out. Can you talk about, just regardless of level, whether it's D1, D2, D3, what are some things that you should be looking at from an academic perspective as a student athlete when you're going to pursue some of these schools?
You need to prioritize what's important to you. And this is what I tell families all the time, like, and I kind of realized this, like I had the tough decision of leaving UCLA to come to Nevada. That wasn't an easy decision for me. It's my alma mater. My entire family's from Los Angeles. My girlfriend's family's from Los Angeles. So, there's a lot of influence. And what I did was I went and visited Nevada. I interviewed and they offered me the position. And I made a list of pros and cons and what's important to me and how can this further my objectives, and I don't see it as being any different than what you would do as a recruit trying to choose a school. So there's going to be a ton of schools that have engineering or have, these more difficult science-based, math-based majors. The truth of the matter is you need to ask the university, okay, you have these degrees, how many people have graduated from them? So let's say I'm a student athlete and I'm interested in, kinesiology. Uh, Kinesiology, it's a degree that's doable, but how many guys on that team do it? How many people in your career have you seen do it? So on and so forth. And that way you can kind of get to the root of what they're actually selling you. So once you become a recruited athlete and you have options at certain schools, it's finding out the details and asking questions like that so you can see, hey, you hear nowadays, I want to be an engineer. That's awesome. Like Nevada has an amazing engineer program. We have a few kids on our roster that have gone through engineering and, and they had to sacrifice some things because engineering was important to them and football was important to them. So they may have lost some things in their social life because engineering is a more challenging major than, say, sociology is, and so I think that's what people need to kind of understand when it comes to the academic side of it. Where am I going to go to, first of all, what's important to me? I really see it in a few different aspects, football, academics, social life. And social life can be, spiritual, whatever that means to you. It doesn't necessarily mean just partying. I think it, whatever you decide to do on your off time, I consider social life. And so you got to just prioritize those and see, all right, if maybe social life's not so important and I really want to pursue this major, but it's really challenging, how can this school help me through it? Are there people in the past that have done it? What am I up against? And just being realistic with yourself when it comes to that.
Yeah, that's great stuff, man. So once you get into these schools, the transition can be challenging, whether you're coming from a JUCO or you're coming right out of high school. What are some ways that you can prep for your first year, your first couple months in this new place with this, new family that you have, basically?
Yeah. The first thing is everybody's going to be homesick, that's a part of it. Don't be afraid to be homesick. That's an okay feeling. It shouldn't be something that brushes to the side. If you're homesick, tell people, we're here. We have a support staff at Nevada that includes off-field coaches like myself, position coaches, strength coaches, your trainers, your academic support. All those people are here to help you. So one is just don't be afraid of, some of the feelings you might be feeling as you go through this process. But two, I would say, just make the resources work for you. When you come to a place like Nevada, we're going to put you through, and a lot of programs do this, I'm sure. I can't speak to them, but, development programs and transitioning you and making sure you're in summer school. And so like, you're going to be extremely busy. I would just try to prepare yourself for time management and things of that nature. And I don't know if I'm really hitting the root of your question, but I would say that, like, in order to prepare for college life as a student athlete, you're going to have very little time to have to do a lot of things. You only have 24 hours in a day. So I would, in my senior year, for example, I would prepare myself to have kind of a very structured schedule. And that way I'm used to it when I go to college. You're going to have to wake up at 5 a.m., depending on the program, 5 a.m. to go to treatment before practice. Then you might have weightlifting. Then you have your typical class schedule. You have to study. You have assign, so on and so forth. And you can only do so much, especially during the season. For example, football is a fall sport, so you're thrown into it right away. So I just say preparing yourself to manage your time as wisely as possible, but also utilizing the resources that are in place for you. Don't be afraid to go up to people and ask for help and get questions answered. And like, that's why we're here. Everybody is in this business because, one, they love the sport, but two, they want to help people in some way or form. Strength coaches want to develop players and allow them to get fit and excel at their craft. For me, it's, I want to help you realize a dream and incorporate you on a roster and build the best roster possible so we can win a championship. But I also want to see you succeed on the field and off the field. For academic people, they want to support you academically and make sure you get your degree, and there's a little bit of all of that with everybody. So utilize the resources you have. I think I can only name a handful of student athletes that I've met through my time that have really tapped into the resources. A lot of the kids, they get spoon-fed the resources, but they just don't swallow. It's like, hey man, like, this is all here for you. Utilize the resources and make Nevada work for you, or make the school work for you.
Yeah, I've definitely seen that a bunch too. So much opportunity at some of these programs, and you would want to see somebody take full advantage of it. Not always the case. There are a lot of cases where they do, but there are a good amount where there aren't. I think also you have to take into consideration the load throughout the day. That's going to be, I mean, that's indescribable when you really see these kids getting up at 5 a.m., going to treatment. Like, hey, it's an adult world. It's not, you're not in high school. You're not going to have anybody waking you up. Nobody's going to baby you to get there. You have this whole program that you have to fulfill your commitment to, as well as a ton of academic responsibility that you need to keep up, or you're not going to be in the program for so long.
Yeah.
So those days literally go from anywhere from 5 a.m. to 10, 11 p.m. Ideally, I mean, we had always pushed for sleep to be a huge component, and you have to make really mature decisions at an early age in order to optimize that recovery process. And some people have a big learning curve, and it's tough.
Yeah, that's why I say, if you can try to develop your habits prior to going into college, it'll help you a lot. And then also lean on people. Use us as a crutch to help you get through some things, because we've all experienced all of that. But I think the biggest thing is, athletes in general are held to a higher standard than the rest of society. There are certain things that we can't do that other people can do. We can't talk about that other people can't talk about. You're going to be under the microscope, and just part of that is understanding that, like, you have to sacrifice to be a student athlete. If you want the college experience of, joining a fraternity and partying and, joining all these different clubs and groups, and, that's not as realistic for a student athlete. It's just the truth. You have so much of a time commitment to your craft and being a football player, a basketball player, whatever sport you choose, there's a commitment there. And so you're going to have to sacrifice. And that's why I say prioritizing is really important, because depending on the level of athletics you play in, the sacrifice varies. So I would say just kind of having a full comprehension and really thinking about what's important to you. Do I really want to make this sacrifice of being a student athlete? And, you'll get some kids that are the most elite prospects in the country, and really, they don't really love the game. And they find out a year or 2 years in, like, wow, this really isn't for me. And they don't have success. Maybe just because they were really good means they probably shouldn't have pursued that, but it's hard to throw away a scholarship when you're a top 100 player in the country, So I think that just having your priorities in a row and really taking the time to think about, what it is you want. And that's such a hard thing to ask a 14 to 18-year-old person to do.
Mm-hmm.
You got so many different other things on your mind, but that kind of goes into my point that student athletes and athletes in general are held to a higher standard. So yeah, the typical 14 to 18-year-old isn't going to be asked those questions, but you're going to have to be, because that's what a student athlete has to go through.
Exactly, 100%. And I think that's just something that you have to be honest with yourself about, and not enough people are honest with themselves about whether or not they want to pursue college athletics. And then once you really understand the responsibility, know that it's not going to be the social life of your roommate who isn't on the football team, or the person down the hall who doesn't have the same responsibilities. It's going to be totally up to you to make those decisions, or it's really just
Yeah.
not going to work out so well. So that's the honest truth about it.
Yeah.
It's
And
brutal.
that's a sacrifice you make, but you also get certain things that a lot of those people don't, certain luxuries. So it's a give and take, but, it's rewarding at the end of the day, I think, in my opinion, at least. But that's kind of what's driven me through my life, and I wouldn't have much without these team environments. So I think that's why I'm more inclined to it. But, you know, it's not a bad thing to not want to, maybe you want to be more like your roommate who has a chance to party. That's okay. Just make that decision on your own.
Exactly. I'd agree with you 100%. And just that might be even tougher than anything else, because people have expectations of you, whether it be your parents or your friends, that you're going to be this
Right.
athlete, and that's how you've defined yourself for your whole life, where maybe that's not how you want to define yourself moving forward, and you want to take the work ethic that you learned in athletics and transfer that to some life
Hmm.
parallels that are going to be more valuable. But it can't be the parents wanting it. It can't be the coach, your high school coach, wanting it.
Right.
It's you as the student athlete have to want to play the game, have to truly love the game
Right.
in order to make it through when things get tough.
Well, you kind of mentioned earlier about, parents and whatnot, and I think that kind of plays a little bit into it. Is, it's really the student's decision, because they're gonna have to be living that life for 4 or 5 years or however long, and so that's why it's important to encourage the student to make those priorities, and the parent can help you, but at the end of the day, it's your decision. So you need to be the one to prioritize things and decide how important it is for you. Otherwise it's kind of just a waste.
Agreed, man. Agreed. So I think we have a ton of great takeaways, and just being brutally honest about the process is something that a lot of people just aren't aware of. It's not always going to be this hunky dory thing, and it's not always going to be nice, and it's not like that. It's competitive, it's grueling, but
Yeah.
the sacrifices you put in are what you're going to get out of it. And you're a great example of just going through that and putting in the work, especially post college, and working your way up through the ranks. And we all had to do it. It's just something as a high school student that you don't usually think about, or you have the mindset that, hey, I have a college degree and this is going to be
Right.
a ticket to avoid any hard work or any internships or any
No.
grueling things that you have to do. So, yeah, man, I really appreciate you coming on today.
Yeah, no problem, man. Appreciate you having me. And it's a hard decision, so it's worth thinking through, because it is a really important decision. So hopefully people can take something from this and apply it to their actual lives.
Absolutely, man. Thank you again. I will talk to you soon.
All right, man. Take it easy.
You too. Bye.